"Remove this broke, old woman from our table," my daughter-in-law said, raising one perfectly manicured hand, as if I were a spill on the white linen instead of the woman who had given birth to her husband. For 1 second, the entire dining room at the harbor room went silent around us, or maybe it only felt that way to me. The forks still touched plates. I still clicked inside crystal glasses. Somewhere behind me, a waiter was describing the evening special in a careful, polished voice. But at our table, every face froze. Lauren stood beside my chair in her cream designer dress, smiling the kind of smile people use when they want cruelty to look like confidence. Across from her sat my son, Ethan, 43 years old, expensive watch on his wrist, eyes lowered to the untouched bread plate in front of him. I had arrived 10 minutes early because that was how I was raised. I wore my navy Sunday dress, the one with the pearl buttons, and carried a small wrapped gift for my grandson, Noah. Lauren had told me it was a family dinner, nothing fancy, just a chance to sit together after months of missed calls and hurried holidays. I believed her. Even at 71, even after burying my husband Charles 2 years earlier, even after learning how quiet a house could become when the man who loved you was gone, I still believed family invitations meant something. When I reached the table, Lauren looked me up and down before I had even pulled out my chair. Her eyes stopped at my sensible black shoes, then at the small gift bag in my hand. "Margaret," she said, "not Mom, not Mrs. Whitaker, not even a warm hello. This is a private reservation." I thought she was joking. I smiled because older women are trained to smooth sharp edges before anyone admits there is a knife. "You invited me, Lauren." Her laugh was soft, but it carried. I invited family who understands boundaries. Ethan shifted in his seat, but did not speak. My grandson was not there. Neither were the cousins Lauren had mentioned. It was only Ethan, Lauren, two of her friends from the country club, and a man I recognized from Whitaker Home and Design's board dinners. Then Lauren turned toward the host stand and called for the manager. "There seems to be some confusion," she said, loud enough for the next table to hear. "This woman is bothering us." I felt my fingers tighten around the handle of Noah's gift bag. The manager approached with the cautious look of a man who knew money often spoke before truth did. Lauren pointed at me without touching me. "Remove this broke, old woman from our table." That was when Ethan finally looked up. For one foolish heartbeat, I waited for my son to stand. I waited for him to say, "That is my mother." Instead, he swallowed and said, "Margaret, please don't make a scene." Margaret, not Mom. That hurt more than Lauren's words. I set the gift bag on the empty chair beside me, folded my napkin once, then placed it neatly on the table. My hands were steady, though I could no longer feel my fingertips. I looked at Ethan, at the boy I had rocked through fevers, at the man sitting silent in the life his father and I had built. Then I stood. "Enjoy your dinner," I said. No one followed me. No one called my name. Behind me, Lauren gave a small satisfied sigh, as if order had been restored. Outside, the Charleston air was warm and damp, smelling faintly of salt from the harbor. I walked to my old Buick alone, sat behind the wheel, and stared at the reflection of the restaurant lights on the windshield. They thought they had removed me from their table. By morning, I would remove them from mine. I drove home with both hands on the steering wheel, the way Charles used to tease me for doing when I was nervous. 10 and 2, he would say, as if I were still taking my first driving test. The streets of Charleston looked softer at night, all gas lamps and brick sidewalks and porch lights glowing behind old iron gates, but nothing felt soft inside me. My dress collar seemed too tight. My purse sat on the passenger seat, empty of Noah's gift, and that small absence hurt more than I expected. I kept seeing the empty chair where I had left the package, the blue ribbon curled against the white tablecloth, a birthday book for a little boy who had once begged me to read the same story 3 times in a row. When I reached my house on Willow Street, the porch light flickered once before settling into a dull yellow glow. Charles had meant to replace that fixture before he passed. He had made a list on the notepad beside his chair: porch light, attic window, loose hinge and pantry. 2 years later, the list was still there, his handwriting slanting upward like it always did when he was in a good mood. I parked the Buick in the driveway and sat for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. No one had called. Not Ethan. Not Lauren. Not even a polite message pretending there had been a misunderstanding. The silence in my phone was its own answer. Inside, The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and old wood. I did not turn on the living room lamp right away. I walked through the dark by memory, past the umbrella stand, past the hallway table with our wedding photograph, past the grandfather clock Charles bought at an estate sale because he said every home needed one thing that sounded older than regret. In the kitchen, I set my purse on the counter and removed my shoes. My feet ached, but the ache was ordinary. Useful. Something I could understand. On the refrigerator, under a magnet shaped like South Carolina, there was a drawing Noah had made for me last spring. 3 stick figures stood in front of a crooked blue house. Grandpa was still in the picture, even though Charles had been gone for almost 2 years by then. Noah had drawn him with wings, not because anyone told him to, but because children know how to make love visible. I touched the edge of the paper, then lowered my hand. That was when I remembered Ethan's face at the restaurant. Not angry, not shocked, not trapped, just tired of being inconvenienced by my presence. I had spent months blaming Lauren for every closed door, every missed invitation, every strange change in my son's voice. Tonight, I understood something colder. Lauren may have lit the match, but Ethan had watched the room fill with smoke and chosen not to open a window. I poured a glass of water from the tap and stood at the sink without drinking it. Outside, the crickets were loud in the hedges. Across the street, the Hendersons had left their porch swing moving in the breeze. Everything looked normal. That was the cruelest part. A woman could be humiliated in front of strangers, abandoned by her only child, and still the neighborhood would keep glowing politely under the same southern moon. I walked to Charles's study and opened the door. The room had not changed much since the day he left for the hospital and never came home. His reading glasses rested beside a stack of invoices from Whitaker Home and Design. His leather chair had softened in the middle from years of use. On the wall hung the first dollar we ever made, framed between 2 faded photographs of our original storefront. Back then, I swept the floors, answered phones, measured curtains, kept ledgers, and packed delivery boxes while Ethan slept in a playpen behind the counter. Lauren never saw that version of me. She only saw silver hair, old shoes, and a widow she thought could be moved aside. I sat in Charles's chair and finally drank the water. It tasted metallic and cold. Then I looked at the bottom drawer of his desk. The brass handle had a small scratch on the left side from the year Ethan tried to open it with a screwdriver when he was 12. Charles had laughed until I told him to discipline the boy. That drawer held the old company records, the estate papers, and the sealed envelope Charles once told me not to ignore if the family ever forgot its own history. I had not opened it because I wanted to believe love would be enough. That night, in the quiet of that study, I reached for the key. The key was still taped beneath the middle drawer, exactly where Charles had kept it for 38 years. I held it between my fingers for a long moment. But before I opened the bottom drawer, the memories began arriving in order, as if someone had been saving them for me all along. 6 months earlier, Lauren had called to say Noah's school concert had been moved from 7 o'clock to 4:30. I arrived at 4:15 with a bouquet of yellow daisies and sat in the parking lot until the janitor told me the concert had ended at 3. Through the glass doors, I saw parents walking out with programs in their hands and children, carrying paper stars on wooden sticks. Ethan called me that evening, confused when I asked how Noah had done. "Mom, Lauren said you were not feeling well," he told me. I remember standing beside the kitchen phone, looking at the daisies drooping in the sink, and saying nothing because I did not want to make trouble. Then came Easter brunch at their house on King Street. Lauren told me they were keeping it small, just the children and a quiet meal, so I baked a coconut cake and drove over after church. There were 12 cars in the driveway. Through the front window, I saw people laughing in the dining room. Lauren opened the door only halfway and said, "Oh, Margaret, I thought Ethan told you we were doing this another time." Behind her, I heard Noah ask if Grandma had arrived. Lauren stepped back and closed the door a little more. "He is confused," she whispered. "Children get attached to routines." I went home with the cake sitting untouched on the passenger seat, white frosting sliding against the cardboard lid in the April heat. After that, the exclusions became smaller, almost careful. A family photo on social media where everyone wore matching blue shirts except me, because no one had told me there was a photographer. A Thanksgiving seating chart where my name was at the children's folding table near the hallway, although there were open chairs beside Ethan. A A company anniversary dinner where Lauren introduced me to a supplier as Charles's widow, not as co-founder, not as Ethan's mother, not as the woman who had signed the first lease when the bank would not give my husband enough credit on his own. Each time, I made excuses for them. People are busy. Young families forget. Grief changes everyone. I told myself those things because believing them hurt less than seeing the pattern. But there were words too, and words leave marks even when they are spoken softly. Lauren liked to speak softly. Margaret gets overwhelmed by numbers now, she told one of Ethan's assistants when I asked about a quarterly report. At her age, too many details just create anxiety. Another time, at a charity luncheon, she touched my arm and said, "You should relax and enjoy being taken care of. Not every older woman needs to feel important." I remember her smile more than the sentence. It was smooth and bright and empty. Ethan was usually close enough to hear. He would adjust his cuff links, check his phone, or look toward the nearest exit as if my discomfort were a weather condition he could not control. The night in Charles's study, all those moments lined up like receipts across a counter. I had thought Lauren was embarrassed by my old Buick, my practical shoes, my careful grocery lists, my refusal to replace good furniture simply because it was no longer fashionable. Now I understood she was not embarrassed. She was preparing a story. In that story, I was forgetful. I was dependent. I was lonely. I was difficult. I was a problem Ethan needed to solve. And once everyone believed that story, anything could be taken from me with a sympathetic voice and a clean signature line. I slid the key into the lock. The drawer opened with a quiet wooden scrape. Inside lay folders, envelopes, and Charles's handwriting on a sealed cream packet. For Margaret, when they forget who you are. I broke the seal with the carefulness of a woman opening something more fragile than paper. Inside was a letter from Charles, 3 folded documents, and a small black and white photograph of the first Whitaker home and design storefront. The photograph had been taken in 1984, the year we rented a narrow building between a barber shop and a hardware store on a street that smelled like sawdust and rain. In the picture, Charles stood beside the front door with his sleeves rolled up, smiling like a man who could already see the future. I stood next to him holding a clipboard, my hair dark then, my dress plain, my face younger than I remembered ever being. Ethan was 3 years old, sitting on the sidewalk with a toy truck between his knees. I touched the edge of that photograph and felt time fold in on itself. Lauren had looked at me and seen an old woman in worn shoes. She had not seen the woman who opened that store every morning at 6:30, swept the entry, balanced invoices, answered customer calls, and drove fabric samples across town in a station wagon with no air conditioning. She had not seen me eating peanut butter crackers for lunch because every dollar went back into payroll. She had not seen Charles and me at the kitchen table after midnight, sorting receipts into piles and praying the bank would give us another 30 days. I unfolded his letter last. "Margaret," it began, "if you are reading this, then someone has mistaken your kindness for weakness." I stopped there. The house was quiet around me, but suddenly it did not feel empty. It felt as if Charles had stepped back into the room. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as the only person who had always understood what I was worth. I kept reading. He wrote that Ethan was capable, but easily influenced by the need to be admired. He wrote that love should not require blind trust, especially when money had a way of making decent people forget their own names. Then came the sentence that made me sit straighter in his chair. "I have left controlling interest where it always belonged, with you." My hands moved to the documents. The first was a copy of the shareholder agreement. The second was an amendment to the family trust. The third was a notarized statement from Charles, witnessed by Harold Benson, confirming that I held 52% of voting control in Whitaker Home and Design. Ethan had been named Chief Executive Officer after Charles passed, but only as an operating role. The company did not belong to him. It did not belong to Lauren. It had never left my hands. I read the numbers twice, then a third time, not because I did not understand them, but because I understood them too well. For 2 years, I had let Ethan speak to me as if I were being supported by the business. In truth, the business was still standing on the foundation Charles and I had poured together. I leaned back and looked at the first dollar framed on the wall. I remembered the day we earned it. A woman from Mount Pleasant bought 2 lamps with brass bases, and Charles whispered, "We are official now, Maggie." He called me Maggie when he was happy. He called me Margaret when he wanted me to listen. In the letter, he had called me Margaret. At the bottom, he wrote one final line, "Never beg for a place at a table you built." I folded the letter, placed it beside the documents, and looked toward the dark window. My reflection stared back at me, silver-haired, tired, but no longer confused. Lauren had made one mistake. She thought humiliation could shrink me. Ethan had made a worse one. He had forgotten who taught him to stand. By sunrise, I had placed Charles's letter, the shareholder documents, and the trust amendment into a brown leather folder he used to carry to bank meetings. I made coffee, but I did not drink it. The cup sat beside the sink until the steam disappeared. Outside, the garbage truck groaned down Willow Street, and Mrs. Henderson walked her terrier past my front hedge like it was any other Tuesday. I had learned something about grief in the 2 years since Charles died. The world does not pause for your broken heart. It keeps collecting trash, watering lawns, delivering mail, and making breakfast reservations while you stand in your kitchen wondering when your own family stopped seeing you as human. At 8:30, I called Harold Benson. I had not spoken to him in nearly a year, not since the last estate review, when he asked if Ethan was treating me well, and I gave the answer mothers give when they are protecting sons from consequences. Harold answered on the second ring, his voice rough but alert. "Margaret," he said, and just hearing my name spoken with respect made my throat tighten. I told him I had opened the packet. I told him about the restaurant, the manager, Lauren's voice, Ethan's silence. I did not dress it up. I did not cry. I simply gave him the facts in the order they happened. When I finished, Harold said nothing for several seconds. I heard papers shifting on his desk. Then he asked, "Did anyone ask you to sign anything recently?" I looked toward the folder. "Not yet." His voice changed. It became quieter, sharper. "Then they are not finished." By 10 o'clock, I was sitting across from him in his office on Broad Street, where the windows looked out over live oaks and slow traffic. Harold was 68, with white hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the patient expression of a man who had spent 40 years watching. Families become strangers over money. He did not offer me pity. I was grateful for that. He read Charles's letter again, then opened a separate file from his cabinet. Charles was worried, he said. Not about Ethan's ability to run the company. About his ability to resist pressure. I folded my hands in my lap. He meant Lauren. Harold did not answer directly. Good lawyers rarely do. Instead, he slid a document toward me. This is the protective clause he added 18 months before he passed. I looked down at the page. The language was formal, careful, and cold in the way legal language can be cold, but the meaning was clear. Any attempt by an heir, spouse of an heir, or representative to coerce, humiliate, isolate, misrepresent, or pressure me regarding company shares, property, voting rights, or trust assets could trigger immediate review of Ethan's operating authority. Public humiliation was there in black ink. Financial pressure was there too. Isolation, misrepresentation, elder coercion. Each word sat on the page like a locked door. Harold watched me read it. Charles insisted on that paragraph himself. I told him it was unusual. He told me families only call things unusual until they need them. I thought of Lauren's friends at the table, the board member watching, the manager hesitating, Ethan calling me Margaret as if motherhood were an inconvenience. There may be camera footage, Harold said. Restaurants keep recordings for liability reasons. I can request it today. I nodded. My hands were still. Do that. He studied me for a moment. Margaret, once we begin, Ethan will know. I looked past him to the courthouse roofline outside the window. No, I said. Not yet. I want to see what they ask me to sign first. Harold leaned back slowly, and something like respect moved across his face. I picked up Charles's letter and placed it back in the folder. For the first time since the dinner, I felt no shame at all. Shame belongs to the person who does the humiliating, not the one who survives it. Lauren waited 2 days before calling me. I knew because I had begun marking the silence, not out of hope, but out of discipline. Wednesday passed with no word from Ethan. Thursday morning, I found a text from Lauren waiting on my phone while I was watering the ferns on the back porch. It said she hoped we could all move forward like adults, and that she was hosting a small brunch on Sunday to clear the air. The words were polished smooth, but I could feel the edge beneath them. I stood there with the garden hose in my hand, watching water gather around the roots of Charles's hydrangeas, and I understood that this was not an apology. It was an appointment. I answered with 4 words. I will be there. On Sunday, I wore a pale gray dress, low heels, and the pearl earrings Charles gave me on our 30th anniversary. I drove to Ethan's house on King Street with Harold's warning folded neatly inside my mind. Do not sign anything without reading it. Do not agree to verbal summaries. Do not let them separate you from your documents. The house looked perfect when I arrived. Fresh flowers on the porch, trimmed boxwoods, a white wreath on the door, although it was not a holiday. Lauren believed presentation could make anything look innocent. She opened the door before I rang the bell. "Margaret," she said, too brightly. "I am so glad you came." Her smile paused when she saw I had brought no purse large enough to hide paperwork, no folder, no visible sign of resistance. That pleased her. I let it. Ethan stood in the living room near the fireplace, hands in his pockets, looking tired and uncomfortable. I waited for him to say hello first. He did not. Lauren led us into the dining room, where the table was set with croissants, fruit, coffee, and a stack of papers placed directly in front of my chair. Not beside the plates. Not in an office. In the middle of a family table. I sat down slowly. "What is this?" I asked. Lauren poured coffee with graceful hands. "Just some housekeeping. Nothing dramatic." Ethan cleared his throat. "Mom, we have been talking, and we think it is time to simplify things." There it was. "Mom," again, now that he wanted something. Lauren slid the top page toward me. "At your age, peace is better than paperwork. You should not have to worry about voting rights, property taxes, business decisions, or old legal language that Charles handled years ago." I looked at the paper. A limited power of attorney. Beneath it, a voting proxy. Beneath that, a proposal to sell my house on Willow Street and place the proceeds into what they called a family-managed account. My name appeared everywhere. My consent was assumed in every paragraph. "This will protect you," Ethan said, but he did not look at me when he said it. Lauren touched his arm, then turned to me with soft concern. "After the other night, it became clear that public situations are becoming stressful for you. We do not want people taking advantage of confusion." I lifted my coffee cup and set it down without drinking. "Whose confusion?" Lauren's smile tightened. "Margaret, let us not make this harder than it needs to be." Ethan finally leaned forward. "Mom, just sign. Let us take care of the hard things." For a moment, I saw him at 8 years old, sitting at our kitchen table, crying because long division felt impossible. I had put my hand over his and said, "Hard things get easier when you stop being afraid of them." He had forgotten that lesson. I had not. I picked up the pen Lauren had placed beside the papers. Her shoulders relaxed. Ethan exhaled. I uncapped it, then wrote one sentence across the blank notepad beside the documents. "I will review these with my attorney." Lauren's face changed so quickly that I almost missed it. The warmth vanished first, then the patience, then the mask. "That is not necessary," she said. I stood, folded the notepad page once, and placed it in my coat pocket. Necessary is a word people use when they are afraid of questions. Ethan whispered my name, but this time I did not turn around. I left the papers and signed on the table and walked out under the white wreath that made their house look so clean from the street. By Monday morning, the papers Lauren had placed in front of me were no longer just an insult. They were evidence. I carried them to Harold's office in the same brown leather folder that had held Charles's letter, and Harold read every page without interrupting. His office was quiet except for the turning of paper and the faint hum of traffic beyond the windows. When he reached the voting proxy, his mouth tightened. When he reached the proposal to sell my house, he removed his glasses and set them on the desk. "They were not asking for help," he said. "They were asking you to disappear on paper." I looked at my own name typed again and again beneath paragraphs I had never requested, never discussed, never approved. It was strange seeing your life reduced to clean margins and signature lines. No raised voices. No ugly scene. Just polite language designed to move a woman out of her own authority. Harold made copies and called the bank first. Then he called the corporate attorney listed on the bottom of the documents. He did not raise his voice either. That was how I knew he was angry. By noon, the first answer arrived. A request had been made 3 weeks earlier to prepare a transfer of voting authority from me to Ethan. The request had come through Ethan's business email, but the follow-up number belonged to Lauren. By 1:30, Harold's assistant found another thread involving a scanned copy of my signature from an old charitable donation form. It had not been used on a final document, not yet, but it had been inserted into a draft authorization. I sat very still when Harold showed me. My signature looked almost right. That was what made it worse. Someone had studied the shape of my name closely enough to imitate obedience, but not closely enough to understand the woman behind it. Margaret, Harold said carefully. This has moved beyond family pressure. I folded my hands in my lap. I know. At 3 o'clock, the harbor room sent over the security footage after Harold's formal request. We watched it on his computer, the picture silent but clear. There I was, standing beside the table with Noah's gift in my hand. There was Lauren, gesturing toward me with that smooth, practiced confidence. There was Ethan, seated, watching his water glass as if it held some answer he did not want from his own mother. The manager approached. Lauren spoke. I stood. I left. No one followed. Seeing it from above made it colder. From that angle, grief had no sound. Humiliation had no music. It was just a woman in a navy dress being erased in front of people who found it easier to keep eating. Harold paused the video at the moment Ethan looked up but remained seated. Do you want me to send notice today? He asked. I looked at the frozen image of my son. For the first time, I did not see the boy from the playpen behind our first store counter. I saw a man who had been given several chances to remember love and had chosen comfort instead. Not today, I said. Harold turned toward me. There is a board meeting Thursday. I already knew. Ethan had mentioned it weeks earlier, back when he still spoke to me as if I were harmless. Then Thursday is soon enough. That evening, I went home and made soup because Charles always said clear thinking required something warm in the stomach. While it simmered, Ethan called. I watched his name glow on my phone until it stopped. Then Lauren called twice. I let that stop too. I was not hiding. I was listening to the quiet before people realized the quiet had changed sides. Thursday morning arrived with rain. Not the dramatic kind that pounds against windows. Just a steady Charleston rain that made the streets shine and soften the edges of the old buildings downtown. I dressed slowly, choosing a charcoal skirt suit I had not worn since Charles's last company anniversary dinner. It still fit, though the shoulders felt a little loose now. I pinned my silver hair back, put on the pearl earrings again, and placed Charles's letter in my handbag beside the brown leather folder. Before leaving, I stood in his study and looked at the framed first dollar on the wall. I am going back to the table, I said quietly. The Whitaker Home and Design headquarters sat in a renovated brick warehouse near the old railroad line. 3 stories of glass offices, polished concrete floors, and framed photographs of beautiful rooms we had helped furnish over the years. I remembered when that building was only a dream Charles sketched on napkins. Now Lauren liked to pose in front of it for charity newsletters, calling it Ethan's legacy. The receptionist looked surprised when I walked in with Harold beside me. Mrs. Whitaker, she said, standing too quickly. I did not know you were expected. I am not, I replied. That is why I came. The boardroom was on the 3rd floor, with windows facing the wet rooftops and the church steeples beyond them. Ethan sat at the head of the long walnut table, wearing the same navy suit he wore when he wanted to look decisive. Lauren sat to his right in a white dress, her hair smooth, her tablet open, a slim gold pin resting between her fingers. 3 board members were present, along with the corporate attorney and the finance director. Conversation stopped when I entered. Lauren recovered first. She always did. Margaret, she said, with a laugh too light to be real. This is not a family meeting. I set my folder on the table. I know. Ethan stood halfway, then seemed unsure whether to come toward me or remain where he was. He chose the chair. Mom, what are you doing here? There was that word again, brought out only when witnesses were present. Harold stepped beside me and placed his briefcase on the table. Mrs. Whitaker is here in her capacity as majority voting shareholder. The room changed. Not loudly. No one gasped. No one stood. But the air tightened around every face. Lauren blinked once. That is not accurate. Harold removed a document from his briefcase and slid copies down the table with the calm precision of a man dealing cards to people who had already lost. It is accurate. 52% voting control, confirmed by shareholder agreement, trust amendment, and notarized statement from Charles Whitaker. The finance director reached for the papers first. Ethan did not move. Lauren looked at him, then at the attorney, then at me. For the first time since I had known her, she had no prepared expression ready. I opened my folder and placed 3 items in front of me. The signed shareholder documents. The printed email threads. A still image from the harbor room footage, showing Lauren pointing toward me while Ethan sat with his eyes lowered. This company was built before either of you knew how to spell profit, I said. My voice did not shake. Charles designed rooms. I kept the lights on. I paid vendors when we had $12 left in checking. I drove deliveries in August heat because we could not afford another employee. I signed the lease on the first store. I signed the first payroll checks. I signed the loan that nearly cost us our house. Lauren's lips parted, but Harold spoke before she could. There are also documented attempts to prepare unauthorized transfers of Mrs. Whitaker's voting authority, including use of her prior signature in a draft authorization and communications routed through Mrs. Lauren Whitaker's phone number. The corporate attorney looked sharply at Lauren. Ethan finally found his voice. Lauren. It came out small. She did not answer him. She looked at me instead, and behind her polished face I saw the truth arrive. She had called me broke in a restaurant full of strangers because she believed I had nothing left but old memories and a house she could sell. She had never checked who owned the room her lifestyle depended on. I turned to Ethan. You let your wife reduce me to an inconvenience. But silence is also a decision. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Around the table, no one reached for coffee. No one checked a phone. For once, everyone was listening. Harold did not raise his voice when he asked the corporate attorney to read the emergency provisions aloud. That made it worse for Ethan, I think. Anger gives people something to defend themselves against. Procedure gives them nowhere to hide. The attorney adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and read the clause Charles had written into the agreement. Any officer who participated in financial pressure, public humiliation, isolation, or attempted transfer of my voting control without informed consent could be suspended pending review. The words moved around the boardroom slowly, settling on every polished surface. Lauren stared at the table as if the walnut grain might open and swallow the evidence. Ethan kept looking at me, then away, then back again, like a man trying to find the mother he had misplaced inside the shareholder sitting across from him. When the attorney finished, Harold placed one final document on the table. Mrs. Whitaker is exercising her right to initiate an independent audit and temporary suspension of executive authority for 90 days. Ethan stood then. Mom, please. I looked at him carefully. I had waited a long time to hear that word carry regret instead of convenience. Sit down, Ethan. He sat. Not because I was cruel. Because for the first time in years, he remembered I had authority. The board voted before noon. Ethan's role as chief executive officer was placed under review. Lauren was removed from all informal advisory access, all internal communications, and every financial discussion connected to Whitaker Home and Design. Her name had never belonged on company documents, but somehow it had appeared in hallways, emails, lunches, and decisions. That ended before the rain stopped. She tried once to speak to me near the elevator. Margaret, this is unnecessary, she said, her voice thin beneath all that polish. I turned to face her. Unnecessary was calling a manager to remove me from a dinner table. This is accounting. Her mouth tightened, but there were too many witnesses for her to perform kindness. She walked away with her white dress brushing against the glass wall, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. Ethan followed me outside after the meeting. The rain had become a mist, soft enough to rest on my hair without soaking it. He stood beside my Buick in the parking lot, hands empty, face pale. I am sorry, he said. I placed the folder on the passenger seat before answering. For what? He blinked. For everything. Everything is not an apology, Ethan. It is a hiding place. His eyes filled, but I did not step forward to comfort him. That was the hardest thing I did that day. Harder than the documents, harder than the boardroom, harder than watching Lauren's confidence collapse. A mother's hands remember reaching for her child, even when that child has grown into a man who allowed her to be shamed. I should have stopped her, he whispered. Yes, I said. You should have. He looked down at the wet pavement. Can I fix it? I thought of Charles's letter, Noah's gift left on that empty chair, the coconut cake melting in the passenger seat months earlier, the school concert I never saw. Not today. His face changed, but he did not argue. Maybe that was the first decent choice he had made in a long while. I drove home through streets washed clean by rain, past porches and churchyards and oak branches heavy with water. At my house, I unlocked the door and carried the folder back to Charles's study. I did not feel victorious. Victory is too loud a word for what I felt. I felt steady. That evening, I set my small kitchen table for one, then changed my mind and set out a second plate for memory, not grief. I warmed soup, sliced bread, and opened the window to let the damp air in. They had called me poor because they thought poverty meant old shoes and a quiet house. But the poorest people I knew had sat at that boardroom table, losing the one thing money could not buy back once it was spent carelessly: trust.